We saw in the life of Job how the adversary was able to do all these things to Job and how Job just wasn't able to understand why it was happening. How the adversary waged this covert operation on Job like he did with pretty much all the people that he afflicted in the Old Testament. And Job and his friends were not able to understand that spiritual battle or how Satan worked. They weren't able to understand the covert operations because they didn't have any intelligence. They're not talking about military intelligence or intellectual intelligence, but they had no spiritual intelligence because they lost that at the time of the fall. When man lost Holy Spirit, he lost the ability to understand spiritual matters. That's why we'll read again 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14.
But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned.
That is such an important truth to recognize when you're reading the Old Testament. That they could not understand these things. They could not receive them. They could not understand them because they were spiritually discerned and they did not have spirit. You know, if you didn't have a brain, you couldn't understand anything in the world, right?
That's right.
Explains perhaps some? No. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, we also read,
lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices.
That's true for us today. We don't have to let Satan get an advantage of us, and we better not. Because we are not ignorant of his devices. We do know. We understand the spiritual battle. We understand what's happened. We understand how he works. We understand the devil and Satan and how they operate in the world. But that wasn't true for those people in the Old Testament. Not having Holy Spirit, Satan could do whatever he wanted to. And like Job and his friends, no one ever knew what hit them. They did not understand the spiritual battle like we do. From Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 and following.
Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
Job didn't understand that. He didn't understand the spiritual battle. He didn't understand that he was not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness from on high. Job didn't have a spiritual armor that he could put on. Wouldn't it have been nice if he did?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been great if he could have put on that breastplate of righteousness when his friends were telling him how unrighteous he was?
Yes.
And protect his heart from all the words that they threw at him? He didn't realize that he could have prevented the adversary's attack simply by having that shield of believing. He didn't recognize that the fear in his life is what let it happen. He would have liked to have known. In Job 31, verse 35, he pretty much said so.
Oh, that one would hear me. Behold, my desire is that the Almighty would answer me, and that mine adversary had written a book.
Job would have so appreciated, so would have liked to have known the motives and methods of the devil. The motives and methods of Satan, but he didn't. He didn't know that. There wasn't a book written that explained it to him. He couldn't have understood it if he read it. You know, people at that time, they just walked through life falling into the adversary's traps, never able to see them. They knew, they may have understood that they had an adversary, But they did not understand the way that he worked. They did not understand the methods of the devil, of Satan. You know, a rabbit, a fox, or a beaver may be aware that man is a predator, a natural enemy. But when they come across that trap, they don't say, oh, no dice, I'm not going to fall for that one. That's just a trap to try to catch me. They say, what a nice feeding station. How nice that that guy put this stuff out for me. And the next thing they know it, they stick their foot in it and bam, he's got them, right?
Yeah.
Give you another illustration. This one tickled me because while I was working right on this stuff, I received an email that I thought, wow, I'm so blessed I got this. What a perfect illustration. I think most people today are aware that there are some thieves out there, some very unscrupulous people, some very fraudulent people that are trying to get a hold of their information so that they can steal their identity or take advantage of them in some way. Would you agree that most people are aware of that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet people fall as though, although they know it, the number of people that fall into those kind of traps every day is just absurd and certainly enough to keep these guys going. Well, I got such a thing. When I was working on this, January 22nd, I got this email. Not everybody can see it in the back, but doesn't that look official?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Who do you think that's from? PayPal or something related to PayPal, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me read it to you. Dear customer, thank you for your most recent order with us. Details about your most recent order can be seen below. Please get in touch with our support staff if you weren't the one who placed the order. Order details, your purchase, Bitcoin, in the amount of $322.08. So here it is. It says PayPal credit, like as if this was on a PayPal credit card, which I don't have. And it says invoice receipt. It's a receipt. It's an invoice receipt for my recent purchase for Bitcoin in the amount of $322. And I got it and I thought, oh my goodness. Somebody has falsified a purchase using my account. And they've done it in the amount of $322.08. I better contact them right away to tell them that I didn't really place that account. Why, they've got it. We will notify you as soon as the amount is deducted from your account within 24 hours. Whoa, I better act fast, right? If you wish to cancel the order or have questions, please contact, and then they give me a toll-free number to do it. Now, because I am aware of the trap, and I knew this wasn't just a feeding station, I didn't take that bait and call that number where they would have, in order to cancel that order, gotten all my information, my personal information, maybe my bank account, telling me that the PayPal account was linked to that and they had to know that information and so forth, so they could steal every dime I had. I didn't fall for it. Sadly, many people do. They know that there's people out there doing this kind of stuff, but they don't recognize the snare. They don't recognize the trap. Well, that's the Old Testament. These guys may have been aware that there was an adversary, but they did not know how he operated. They did not recognize that because that snare was hidden. It was concealed until Jesus Christ exposed it. In Job 18, verse 8, one of Job's miserable comforters describes the snare, although he's dead wrong in the way he thinks that Job had fallen into it. Verse 8.
For he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walketh upon a snare.
Keep going.
The gin shall take him by the heel, and the robber shall prevail against him. The snare is laid for him in the ground, and a trap for him in the way.
The trap is set. The robber is waiting for him, that thief, the adversary. And here, this guy, this is again Billy the Shuhite, claimed that Job's sins brought this upon him. But Proverbs tells how Job fell into the snare in Proverbs 29, verse 25.
The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe.
There you have it. The fear of man brings that snare. It causes them to fall right into the trap. But the ones that put their trust in the Lord shall be safe. They stay within the walls. They stay within God's boundaries of protection. Look at Psalm 106, verse 36.
And they served their idols, which were a snare unto them.
Their idols were a snare unto them. Again, idolatry. And what a trap that was. And how idolatry was one of the ways that the adversary got them. Jesus Christ is the one that exposed the snare of the robber, the thief. In John 10, verse 10, very familiar.
The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly.
Jesus Christ came and made known who that thief was. He came and made known what the adversary was doing and how he was doing it, how he was operating. He showed them and exposed that snare and gave them power over it. We read it before, but we'll look at it again in Luke chapter 10, verses 17 to 19.
And the 70 returned again with joy, saying, Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you.
There we have it again. Jesus Christ showing them and giving them power over the enemy. He made them know that there was the enemy, that it was Satan, but that they had the authority over him. Colossians 2:15 once again.
And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it.
Since the day of Pentecost, man no longer has to be ignorant of Satan's devices. He doesn't have to be blinded if he doesn't want to be. But some people, even after Jesus Christ paid the price, set the captives free, made known the snare of the adversary, continue to allow themselves to be blinded by Satan. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3 and 4.
But if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them.
We know who our adversary is, and we know what he wants to do. We recognize that, and we're wise. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8.
Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour.
That's who our adversary is. And it says very clearly, your adversary, the devil, is like a roaring lion walking about, seeing who'd be a good lunch, who'd be a good meal. And we're to be wise, we're to be sober, to be vigilant, to be watchful, to not be taken in by the adversary's tricks. He's a lot craftier than that one. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 26.
And that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil, who are taken captive by him at his will.
That the snare of the devil, and that's what he did. And people, again, even today, when they don't have to be, if they allow Satan to usurp authority that he doesn't have the right to, are still taken captive in that snare of the devil, taken captive by the adversary at his will. Satan no longer has any legal right over the believer. In the Old Testament, he could take advantage of people. Now they could trust God, they could be under that protection, but it was a lot easier for the adversary to pick them off when they didn't understand anything. Today, nobody has to be prey to that roaring lion. But boy, if they continue to be stupid, if they continue to be spiritually blind, if they continue to fall into those traps, if they continue to bump up against those spiritual laws, if they continue to break immutable laws, then again, they're going to be taken by the adversary, fall into a snare at his will. You know, we don't have to be ignorant of his devices, but the people in the Old Testament, they didn't understand it. They didn't know any better. They did not understand the spiritual forces that were controlling them and affecting them, any more so than a 4-year-old child can understand the effect of violating Newton's laws of motion by stepping in front of a speeding vehicle. And so not being able to understand the children of Israel, not being able to have any more spiritual understanding than a small child that would step in front of a speeding vehicle, God didn't try to explain it to them. No more so than any wise parent would say, well, you know, before you step in front of that vehicle, let me explain to you Newton's laws of motion. Instead, what does that parent do? He just says, stop. Don't do it. Don't do it. And that's what God did. Rather than try to explain what they did not have the ability to understand, he simply told them, don't do it. And he gave them the law so they would know what boundaries were, that they could understand the laws that they would be breaking spiritually that would leave them vulnerable to the adversary's attack, that would leave an opening in their hedge of protection. The written law was given to protect and bless God's people. When man violated the law, he suffered the consequences. But that law was not given for the purpose of punishing people that break them. That wasn't the reason why God gave it. The law was given to protect them. Job broke the immutable law of believing with his fear. But did God impart the law of believing so that people like Job that were fearful could suffer the consequences of breaking it? No. Was that his reason for having the law of believing? No. No. He had the law of believing so people could receive from him. But without believing, it's impossible to receive anything from God. For he that comes to God must believe that he is and that he's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. That's the reason for believing. So God could be a rewarder of those that diligently sought after him. But when people don't use it to their advantage and instead in ignorance and fear violate it, then they reap the consequences. All the forces in the world work that way. Is fire a good thing or a bad thing?
Depends on the context.
What about electricity or water or wind?
Same thing.
Can all those elements be used for good?
Yes.
Sure. Can all those elements be used to harm?
Yes.
Sure. You know, terrible destruction can be done by fire or wind or water. You could drown a guy. You could be in a flood that drowns you. All of those elements have a beneficial, positive reason for God having put them there in the first place. But because Satan is the god of this world, he's twisted that purpose and used those elements for harm, for destruction. That's how it is with all of it. If a man uses the forces that I named, fire, water, if he uses them for evil, is God responsible for that? No. You know, if I give Dylan a hot foot, God's not to blame for me giving him a hot foot, him getting burned up with fire just because God made fire, right? Right. When Satan has the god of this world, the things that were there, like the immutable law of believing, and there's other ones, giving and receiving, love, those are other immutable laws. When he does that, or he breaks other laws that were there for people to be able to have the blessings of God on their life, that's simply the misuse of those laws and man violating them, and Satan making sure that he pays the price for it as the God of this world. Those spiritual laws that were written at the time of Moses didn't originate at the time of Moses. Just like Newton didn't invent the laws of physics, but he just recognized them and wrote them down. God gave Moses the law. Moses didn't discover it. God gave it to him. But it's the same thing. Man was always subject to those same laws and the same consequences when he ran against them. You know, just like if you step off the cliff, you're going to suffer the consequence, whether you've ever heard of gravity or not. Same with the other laws. But he just didn't understand it. In Romans 5, verse 12, it says, "Wherefore has by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin was not imputed where there is no law." Sin always existed, and the consequences that went with it, long before that law was ever given. It's just people were like, I won't say like Job, because Job didn't sin, but people just didn't know what they had done wrong. And those laws work whether a person knows them or doesn't know them, whether he accepts them or rejects them, whether he likes them or dislikes them, he is still subject to those laws and the consequences that go with them. You know, there are certain laws in the natural world, certain natural laws that I don't particularly like or want to accept. For example, the laws of nutrition. I would like to be able to eat whatever I want to eat, however much of it I want to eat. But if I do so, whether I like it or not, whether I choose to accept it or not, because I'm no longer in my 20s, I'm going to suffer the consequence of that choice. Same thing with the spiritual laws. There are consequences for breaking them. Whether or not man likes it, whether or not God likes it, whether or not the devil likes it, there are consequences whenever spiritual laws are broken. In Deuteronomy 28, we read about the blessings and cursings of the law. We won't read the whole chapter. We'll just hit some highlights here. We'll start with verse 1.
"And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day." Verse 3. Blessed shalt thou be in the city, and blessed shalt thou be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy ground, and the fruit of thy cattle, the increase of thy kine, and the flocks of thy sheep. Blessed shall be thy basket and thy store. Blessed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and blessed shalt thou be when thou goest out. The Lord shall cause thine enemies to rise up against thee, to be smitten before thy face. They shall come out against thee one way, and flee before thee 7 ways. Verse 11. And the Lord shall make thee plenteous in goods, in the fruit of thy body, in the fruit of thy cattle, and in the fruit of thy ground, and in the land which the Lord sware unto thy fathers to give thee. The Lord shall open unto thee his good treasure, the heaven, to give the rain unto thy land in his season, and to bless all the work of thine hand. And thou shalt lend unto many nations, and thou shalt not borrow.
So God put these laws. He put these laws into the universe. He put these laws into the world. And he did it for the purpose of being able to bless man. That if you did these things, you were blessed. You were blessed When you got up, you were blessed when you went to sleep. You were blessed when you went out, you were blessed when you came in. You're blessed in your basket in your store, and all these other ways you were blessed. You were blessed. And that's what God wanted. He wanted his people to be blessed. And he also warned them that if they violated those laws, rather than being blessed, he wouldn't be able to protect them, and a lot of bad stuff would happen. They would be cursed. And that we read in verse 15 and following.
But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy land, the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of thy sheep. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out. Verse 21, the Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee, until he have consumed thee from off of the land, whether thou goest to possess it. The Lord will smite thee with a consumption, and with a fever, and with an inflammation, and with an extreme burning, and with the sword, and with blasting, and with mildew, and they shall pursue thee until thou perish. Verse 27, the Lord will smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with emerods, and with the scab, and with the itch, whereof thou canst not be healed.
So it goes on quite a bit there, but I think you get the idea. And this is not something you want.
No.
I don't think I want any of those things. You know, I don't want the itch that can't be scratched, and that's the least of all the problems. So God simply told them, don't do this and do this, because that's as much as they could understand. And he told them that if they broke those laws, bad stuff would happen. But why does God express it in the Old Testament in the manner in which he appears to be taking responsibility for what Satan does? We saw some of that to some extent. We saw a large reason behind that in light of the snare of the devil, in light of them not being able to understand until Jesus Christ exposed that snare, showed them the trap, showed them, hey, this is not what it seems to be. Don't fall for it. But that's not the only reason why God did not identify these things as being done by Satan or the devil. There's another very important reason. And that is the propensity, the inclination, the constant way that Israel fell into worshiping other gods. And that's such an important thing. In the back of your handout, of your syllabus, and you can look there now, at this page of names for the adversary. And you see many. We're not going to read all of these at this point. But what I want to draw your attention to is the bottom row of those, and there's one other in one of the higher ones. Bel, Baal, Belial, father, up higher, Beelzebub. Okay? All of those names for the devil are all signifying the family relationship of his children to him. Many of those names you probably recognize if you've read the Old Testament has the names of false gods, right?
Yes.
If you've read the Old Testament, you've heard of Baal. You've heard of Belial. You may even have heard of the sons of Belial, where that one directly phrase identifies them. These people as being children of the devil. They were worshiping already the devil by many other names. And God did not want to add to that list by telling them the name of Satan or the devil in all the cases where he was the one who was responsible. The adversary's always been able to deceive people and blind them to who he really was. In 2 Corinthians 11:14, it says, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." He has the ability to do that. He had the ability to transform himself into an angel of light, to get people thinking that he was the true God. And boy, if every time Satan, the adversary, did something that caused harm, if he was identified as the one who brought these things to happen, why then Israel would have been offering sacrifices to him on every hand to try to keep him off their back, to appease him. Isn't that what they did with all the other gods? All their false worship? God didn't want them to do that. And so that's why he told them in Exodus 23, verse 13, to not use the name of other gods.
And in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth.
God said, don't even mention the name of these guys. Don't mention the name of Bel, or Baal, or Belial, or Beelzebub. And he wasn't going to add to that list with Satan or the devil. He simply didn't want them to even acknowledge or recognize them. It says much the same thing in Joshua 23, verses 6 to 8.
Be therefore very courageous to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, that you turn not aside therefrom to the right hand or to the left, that you come not among these nations, that these that remain among you, neither make mention of the name of their gods, nor cause to swear by them, neither serve them, nor bow yourselves unto them.
He didn't want them to even mention their names. God did not want the devil glorified on every hand. In a question and answer thing that you can find on Eternally Blessed, Dr. Wuerl, who in very brief addresses much of the number of the things that we're covering in this seminar, he put it this way: imagine how the Old Testament would read if everything the adversary did was attributed to him. We would read about the adversary on every page. If that was the case, the adversary would be glorified. And it would be him that they would try to appease and worship. He didn't want them to worship the adversary by another name. They're already doing that by too many in the first place. And rather than let that happen, rather than let them end up calling on the name of Satan or the devil, instead, he expressed the things that happened using that in the manner of that idiom of permission to express figuratively what they could not understand the literal truth behind. And what would only cause them to get into more trouble if they did instead use the name of the adversary instead of using the idiom of permission. That's why the idiom was used. Tomorrow we'll get into more about the idiom of permission. Understanding it more has a figure of speech and exactly what that figure of speech means and how it's used in the Word of God. But we'll close out here for today.